So thank you. Okay, now that the recording has started, allow me to introduce, first of all, a good friend and then a good collaborator. This is Merlin Smith. She's coordinating the Energy Action Project. Probably you know it, or you are following the activities and the posts and everything. Merlin will moderate the discussion between Antonia Broca, Besim Nebiu, and Christos Vetros in a while. But first, she would like to share, and we are very looking forward to see some of the activities happening within the Energy Action Project. So, Merlin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alice, and thanks for the opportunity to do this and to share about ENACT specifically before leading the discussion, which I'm really, really looking forward to. So I'm going to share my screen and give you a little PowerPoint presentation. As Alice said, many of you will probably already know about ENACT, but we've had a really exciting year, so I'm happy to tell you more about it. So our tagline is reporting that seeks to empower, and the idea behind that is really that we need more energy reporting in order for citizens to make decisions about energy, but also for everybody that's involved in the energy sector to better understand each other and make decisions collectively. And on the citizen side, everything that everyone does, every minute of every day requires energy. And we believe that it's time for everyone to get energy, not only the physical aspect of having energy services, but to understand where that energy comes from and what your own personal use means for the system. We're also seeking to address two social challenges related to energy. One is the high level of energy poverty globally, whether that means people have no access to energy or it's unreliable or unaffordable. And you can see there's one, well, the green part is the number of sort of energy rich people or people who have sufficient access to energy. The second thing we want to address is low levels of energy literacy. In a basic literacy test in the US, only 12% of people could correctly answer half of 18 questions. So I think there's a lot of work to be done about building energy know-how. When we say reporting that seeks to empower, we also recognize there's a couple of steps to take before you can empower people with energy information. Well, the big story, we have to find creative ways to get people to think about energy because most of us don't very often. And then we also believe that there's these steps of informing people, and in some things that are quite complex, you need to take that extra step of explaining. So it's engage, inform, explain, and empower for us. Our main website relevant to Europe is the Cold at Home website, and we have documentary films. And what we really envision for Cold at Home is to become the most complete resource of good reporting on energy poverty and the energy transition in Europe. And we also believe that it's very important to, and in the engage part of the story, we very much try to tell people, show and tell people the story of energy poverty. So I'm going to try to run 1-minute video here. So the point about Katya's story is that it's not only that she has no money to pay for anything, any of her daily living expenses anymore, it's that her social life is completely changed by the fact that she can't afford to buy a candle to go to church. She's too embarrassed to go to church without being able to buy a candle. So the engage part, as I said, we do films and photos, and we try to make the story of energy poverty very personal and also show and tell the impacts. And we've done a couple of different photo essays that you can find on the website. The inform and explain part is much more feature articles and longer blogs and some interactive elements. So when you watch the film, the longer film about Katya in Ukraine, that's attached to a feature article that explains why gas prices went up 280% overnight. And that it's a long, complicated story that needs, a lot of text to explain the fact that Ukraine has been the transit country for gas coming into Europe, and they've had subsidies. And when the economy was bad and they went to the IMF to ask for a loan, the IMF said, well, you need to get rid of your subsidies. So there's this whole big complex story behind that 280% increase that we feel people need to understand. We also have a whole section on what happens to people physically or mentally when they're chronically cold. And this diagram here gives you an example of the kind of graphics we use to help inform and explain. Then we also tried to develop content that takes it from the personal to the political level on energy poverty. And we have this interactive of what do cold homes cost a country. And this is from the UK. So it's in data from the National Health Services on what kind of hazards people encounter inside their own home that lead to health costs for the NHS. And so in the interactive version, what you're supposed to do is take these different risks, like falling in the bathtub, falling, on a certain level in your house, having a fire, dampness, or excess cold, and you're supposed to move these over here and match them up with the bubble that you think is probably the related healthcare cost. And it turns out that excess cold is the big yellow bubble. Out of all of the hazards cost the NHS 1.4 billion per year. And it's excess cold that costs 848 billion. So again, related to this kind of fun interactive, we have a whole feature article that explains the whole why those costs are so high. And it's basically if you have people who are chronically cold and they have things like COPD or have a heart attack, that's a very high cost, excuse me, for the NHS. So then the other important thing that we do is who's doing what to address energy poverty. And the solutions reporting is what really does empower people. We highlight technology, policy, finance, and social solutions. And again, it's through feature articles and news briefs and all of those things. Part of what we do also is talking to researchers. We have a podcast from Brenda Boardman, and we've also done recently a whole series of podcasts on what access to energy as a basic human right means from different perspectives. And then we also, try to cover what policymakers are doing, what new policy is doing. And this article is a little bit old, but we did it on the warmth and well-being scheme that the government of Ireland put out. And a really important part of that scheme was recognizing these high healthcare costs if you're chronically cold. So in this scheme, a physician who had a patient that was chronically sick from being chronically cold was able to prescribe a housing retrofit for that person. And in the pilot scheme, it was the government of Ireland that was covering the costs of retrofit, but they hoped through the pilot that they would be able to demonstrate that the healthcare system saves so much that it should be the healthcare system that covers the costs of housing retrofits. And I haven't been able to follow up yet to see what the outcome of the pilot project was, but we do plan to do some reporting on that. Then we also do a lot of social media just to raise awareness daily. We provide energy saving tips, and we try to give access to services that people can get in contact with. And we also try to encourage the energy rich to be a bit more conscientious. So there's our Twitter account and our Instagram account. And our Instagram account is quite fun if you happen to be an Instagram follower. What we do is every day we use 4 or 5 photos to tell a short energy story. And it's not necessarily related to energy poverty, but it's just building on that energy literacy aspect. So we've read one study that said most people think about energy about 10 minutes per year, likely when they're paying their energy bill. And we're trying to get people to think about energy for 5 minutes every day. There's some examples of our energy saving tips. These have been translated into a couple of languages. We have about 150 tips in total. And if you're interested in translating them into your own language and using that as a resource, we'd be very happy to talk to you about that. We've also done 11 short videos with citizens' advice and the Step In project. And again, those are available for translation and use by other organizations. And then we did a project with Ashoka Foundation and the Schneider Electric Foundation that was specifically looking at social innovation to tackle energy poverty. So I think there's some solutions in there that will fit well into the energy democracy discussion. And our new collaborations are with the Community Energy for Energy Solidarity project, which is an Horizon 2020 project on exactly on how energy communities can tackle energy poverty. And we've been working on this really great energy literacy project called Walking with Energy. It's a website and online events about energy production. And the idea is to get people to have an opportunity to find out about their own local energy production and think more about how their consumption. So as I said, our overarching aim is to prompt people to think about energy every day. And that concludes my little presentation.
Very informative, and thank you, Merlin.
You're welcome.
So let's proceed with the next session, which is the moderation. And yes, please, the panelists to open their cameras and we can start, and we're looking forward to a fruitful discussion.
Great. Well, I'm super excited about having this discussion and hearing from each of the panelists, and then also hearing from those of you who are listening. Please do put questions into the chat, and at the appropriate time, we'll raise your questions for you. We will, the format going forward is we'll give each of the panelists 5 to 7 minutes to talk about what they're doing. After each panelist, we'll take any questions that are specific to them. Otherwise, we'll wait until each of them have presented before we jump into some of the questions from people who are listening in. One of the first things I wanted to do is just put into our minds a definition of energy democracy. And I looked at a couple of them, and they're quite different in some senses. But I think the one that spoke to me the most was the idea that energy democracy is a political, economic, social, and cultural concept that merges the technical energy transition with the strengthening of democracy and public participation. The concept is connected with ongoing decentralization of energy systems, with energy efficiency and renewable energy being used to strengthen local energy ownership. And with new green technologies available, such a transition is possibly involving new actors, prosumers, renewable energy cooperatives, and municipal community-owned power stations, which replace centralized power corporations. So with that in mind, I think one of the most interesting ideas is that energy is becoming, for us as individual consumers, it is becoming much, much closer to us, and hopefully we'll be more involved in making the decisions about it. In order of the panelists, I'll introduce each panelist just before they speak so that you're better able to connect their background with what they're going to talk about. So the first panelist is Basim Nibiu, and he's the Director of Central and Eastern Europe and the Commonwealth of Independent States for Habitat for Humanity. And so I know Basim is going to talk very much about the housing aspect of an energy transition and a just energy transition and addressing energy poverty. And Basim is also involved in the COMACT project, which I'm sure he's going to talk about a little bit as well. So Basim, I'm very happy to hand the floor over to you.
Many thanks, Marilyn, and thank you for the invitation to join this panel. Greetings to everyone from Bratislava, Slovakia, where I'm based, and that's where our organization, Habitat for Humanity International, has its Europe presence. Just a couple sentences about who we are and connected a little bit with this subject. We are a global housing organization, which exists since 1976 in about 80 countries of the world. And we are dealing with, basically attacking various sources of poverty housing or of, inadequate access to shelter and housing opportunities across the globe. Obviously known for our work in Europe, and we are in Europe in about 15 countries, for about a quarter century, I would say, and we are mostly focusing on Central and Eastern European part of the continent. And there we focused greatly on the issue of residential energy, because that's the most fundamental housing issue. I'd like to start a little bit from the bottom, why the housing perspective. We believe that high use of energy is basically in the home is a housing issue. It is regulated by housing laws. It is part of the housing ecosystem. It is the way that homeowners are functioning within a building or within a community is regulated by the housing legislation and subsystems that describe it. So it essentially is a housing area to address. And obviously there is energy policy and energy perspective to it, but it happens within the house. Right? And as a housing organization, to go to the definition that Marilyn used a little bit, we like to work with the second sentence of her definition, which is strengthening local energy ownership. Yeah, working with those who are right bearers, those who experience the problem, having a people-centered approach towards the problem, not a bottom-up, not a policy perspective, not a macro perspective, although they are very important, but sort of bringing to the attention to all elements of within the housing ecosystem that without work with homeowners would be very difficult to make any sustained and scaled progress. And I think if you analyze the rates of renovation of, especially in multi-apartment buildings, with any other building in Europe, you would get to that kind of a conclusion that it's really difficult to have uptake with the people not playing along. That is sort of the introduction sort of in our approach towards the issue. And in COMACT, which is a project that Marilyn mentioned, we are basically trying to exactly do that, bring existing opportunities for home refurbishment through work with homeowner associations and homeowner association support centers. I wanted to mostly speak here about Central Eastern Europe because there is a specific case to be made. Unlike other parts of Europe, 1991, most of the housing stock got privatized in what were previously socialist countries. And that includes, from Slovakia, where I'm now, to North Macedonia, to, even all of Soviet Union. So basically all the building, the ownership rates are between 80% in Poland to 96-7% in some of the Western European countries. And a lot of the stock is high rises, multi-apartment sector, which was fastly built in the 60s, 70s, 80s to house the people in the urban areas of the formerly socialist countries. Now they're left with a stock which is poorly managed, maintained, and it's almost impossible that without creating a good management and maintenance practice that you have any sort of ownership on anything related to energy, including basic renovation or basic maintenance, and not speaking about doing more significant and deep renovations or systems of local ownership where there is basically the prosumer aspect. So I think here we are talking about a fundamental issue of working with homeowners who are normally part of the homeowner association, because that's how the law requires it, who collectively own the building, but they have very little support or practice in managing the building, because when it was built, that wasn't the social system which regulated it. So it's a significant bottleneck, and it leads to, Slovakia being, let's say, the most progressed in renovation of the housing stock. And we're talking only about 45 to 50% of these buildings renovated. In the Western Balkans, we do pilot projects and demonstration projects and there's like from 5 to 100 buildings in a stock. Just to give you a perspective, just in the city of Tuzla in Bosnia, you would have about 650 of these buildings in the canton. In North Macedonia, there's 12,000 of these buildings. 65 of them are renovated. That's the perspective. Even in the most advanced countries, Czech Republic and Slovakia, the rate of renovation is not more than half, and we use those as best practices. So I think the habitat perspective into this is that if you don't set up strong support for local ownership and support to homeowner associations getting together, understanding some of the benefits that Marilyn talked about, translating it into their own context and to their own wins, if you will, because also these concepts are not our everyday language. This is not things that we talk with friends on a television. So creating everyday discourse where benefits of working together as neighbors in a homeowner association are translated into gains, which is basically another way of creating a community in a high-rise. And that's basically what Habitat is trying to do with the COMAC project and with its partners, and with an earlier version of it. It's called RELI, Residential Energy Efficiency for Low-Income Houses.
Thank you.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting that the name of our RELI website is very similar to yours, Marilyn. It's called getwarmhomes.org. And that's another way of translating energy language, technical language, to what matters to people, because I don't think that many people will get excited to discuss energy efficiency as a topic. So I think it is good to translate that to a language which gets people's attention.
Great. I'm going to interrupt you, Vesima, because we have kind of used up the first 7 minutes, but definitely I think this is an interesting topic to come back to, and certainly we'll give people the chance to ask you more questions after the other presenters. So now I'm going to introduce you to Antonia Proca, who is a project manager in energy transitions at Rescope, the EU network of energy communities. One of the things that I found interesting about your background, Antonia, is that you did a PhD at the Dutch Research Institute for Transitions, DRIFT, and the focus of her research was on sustainable and transformative business models in the context of the energy transition. So combining a business model perspective with transition theory, she examined the potential of innovative bottom-up initiatives to transform energy systems. Also interesting about Antonia is that she was a founding member in 2015 of the Sustainable Energy Youth Network. So I'm not sure you'll have time to chat about that, but definitely tell us about what you're doing at Rescope.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. Thank you very much for having me here, to the organizers, actually. I'm very happy to be with you today. I have prepared a very, very short presentation. I'm going to be sharing this with you because I'm very looking forward to the discussion. I'm going to try to keep it rather short. 1 second, this should be it. So I hope that you see my presentation. I'm going to go full screen. Okay,
perfect.
So perfect. Thank you very much. So very few words about who Rescope EU is, actually. As Marilyn mentioned, we are the European Federation of Citizen Energy Cooperatives. And you can see here, we employ 13 people. We have a board, so we are very democratic in our organization. We have a board of directors. We represent more than 1 million citizens, more than 1,250,000 citizens nowadays that are engaged in citizen energy cooperatives. We're also part of the Sector Federation of Cooperatives Europe and the International Cooperative Alliance. Why I mentioned this? I mention this because really this is key on how we define energy cooperative. We define this as a group of citizens who cooperate on energy transition projects, and but these initiatives have a certain respect of the cooperative principles. They are on the screen. I want to focus specifically on the democratic member control. If you can see, the different colors are there just because these actually principles of voluntary membership, democratic control, autonomy and independence, concerned community are the principles that have been actually accepted by the EU and have guided the landscape, the legislative landscape when it comes to energy communities. But for us, maybe it's important to mention that the legal status is not important. The respect of this kind of principle is what is key. So this is on the introduction. I'm going to use this picture actually to describe a little bit what energy democracy is for us. Maybe some of you can recognize the energy transition to energy democracy was actually one of the first documents that we produced before actually being founded ourselves. Rescue was founded as it was a result of a European project, Rescue 2020. And this set, let's say, the scene for us to continue working on all the very interesting activities that we engage in nowadays that aiming to support the transition to energy democracy. But again, one step back, what is energy democracy to us? I think that I agree with the definition that you gave in the introduction, Marilyn. I think that it has a lot of key elements there. Maybe it's worth also noting that energy transition can be seen both as a goal, an outcome, but also as a process itself. So we see the energy transition also as a process, like we collectively work on this transition. For us, it's important when it comes to the goals of this energy transition, it is important indeed to talk about 100% renewables. It is important that these renewables are actually socially owned, socially controlled. For us, it is also important this key of democratic decision making when it comes to developing projects, when it comes to deciding which is going to be the position, what is exactly going to be the focus of the specific project. I mean, because I don't have the time to present all the variety of the projects that we engage, but the initiatives have the possibility to discuss, okay, do we go for solar, do we go for energy efficiency, because the saving side is also important for us. So this democratic decision making is also very crucial. For us, it's also important to have the principle of social justice. Inclusiveness issues are very, very crucial. So with energy communities, we really try to bring on board the people that are actually going to be influenced by the energy transition. I mean, with the project that we develop, we actually try to make the participation of people as easy as possible, both financially wise, creating like the business models that we discussed, you mentioned earlier, that can allow for participation of the local citizen, but also easy in terms of organization, because the business model, our business model is mainly focuses on this community engagement. So we do the energy transition and we do it together. We collaborate on these projects. Another thing that I wanted to touch upon with this picture that I have put up there, maybe those of you that are familiar, it comes from a very interesting video that we have been preparing back a couple of years back. I will share it later in the chat. We don't have the time to show it right now, I think. But an important element here is that we see that the energy transition for us means also a shift from the fossil fuel energy system, the fossil fuel based energy system towards renewables, but also the from a central system to a decentralized system, and that this system, this new sustainable and inclusive energy system, keeps actually all the benefits at the local community. This is something that you can also see in this picture that I used over there. We actually keep the revenues locally. We try to create more local jobs. We can also decide ourselves democratically what are we gonna, how are we gonna use the positive, let's say, value that we will be creating through the project. How are we gonna use the financial savings that we're gonna see in actually resulting from these local projects. We've seen, for instance, energy cooperatives, energy communities that through wind project, for instance, they have invested the money that they achieved in saving through this project, the generated financial return. They invested locally in maybe, you know, it doesn't have to do with energy all the time. It can be like a local hall for, I don't know, for movies, for social activities. So again, the community, local community can decide how exactly the benefits are going to be used in the local context. And I want to make one reference also with regards to what was mentioned earlier regarding the housing and the whole poverty, energy poverty issue. This is also something that the communities are nowadays working on. And this is where we will see in the future, some models are already under development, but this is an area where the energy communities can also play a role. But here I'm gonna put an asterisk. It is important to mention that the energy democracy gives the opportunity for everyone to take care of each other, also providing this energy, like lower cost energy, sustainable energy. Nevertheless, we should be clear that the responsibility for this kind of activities still lays with the state. So energy communities are going to be, you know, doing the best that they can to improve the situation for the local community, but at the same time, we will be keep on pushing, let's say, for the actors that are responsible for the bigger picture, let's say, to really take action the way that they are supposed to, let's say. So we also try to, last sentence, and then I'm going to stop here. We hope through our democratic operation to really spur like this transition to a realistic, let's say, democratic management at the local and also the national level. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Antonia. I'm sure that there will be questions and comments coming back from the listeners after your interesting presentation. Let's go straight into having Chris present, and then we'll go to questions. So Chris Retros, I said that wrong, I'm sure, is from Electra Green Energy Cooperative, also in Greece. We met one of his colleagues in the first introductions. So Electra aims to fulfill the needs of its members by offering green engineering solutions and engaging citizens and communities to participate in the transition towards a sustainable energy system. One of the interesting things about Chris is that in 2016, he was a co-founder of the Climate Collective, an online platform for people to report and reflect on environmental issues across the world. The collective aims to personalize climate change, invigorate public discussion, and trigger tangible change on different environmental issues that communities are facing at different scales. So I think Chris brings a very interesting background into his current role. And Chris, I'll pass the floor over to you.
Thank you, Merlin. I'm just going to start sharing my presentation right away. And I just want to say that I'll take this chance to draw from what you said, Merlin, that energy democracy is a social, cultural, and political concept, to draw from what Antonia said about how energy communities can actually change the very system itself, in the sense that they bring in these international cooperative principles of direct democracy. And of course, I also want to draw from what Besim said of how energy communities can also expand in like housing associations and like other sorts of activities. So this is where we kind of start talking about a broader system change. And this is what I quickly want to reflect on through my presentation. To what extent can energy communities instigate a post-growth transformation of the energy sector? And let's see what that means. First of all, let's start with a quick snapshot of the energy system today. Globally, material and energy use far outstrips Earth's natural regeneration capacity. Specifically for Greece, where we are active, we're overshooting our fair share of energy consumption levels by 27%. At the same time, this is a very unequal system, with fossil energy companies being responsible for 71% of global emissions since 1988. And of course, Greece is also fully investing in that kind of fossil future, as most European countries still are. At the same time, energy poverty all over Europe, but especially in Greece, is quite high, with 22.7%. So we see that this centralized fossil energy system is neither equal nor sustainable. But a mere transition to renewables will not bring, under a growing economy, will not bring humanity into a safe and just space. We see these tensions being observed all over the world, and especially in the Greek context, with, for example, large-scale renewable energy structure installations being installed in islands or mountaintops and provoking fierce opposition from local societies and civil groups. So we kind of need to start talking about a post-growth energy system, one that enhances both human well-being, but at the same time respects planetary boundaries. I want to quickly refer to this great article that I really recommend that you all have a look at and read. It's quite pessimistic, but at the same time, it really invigorates your imagination. And it poses this question: can we really change everything without changing anything? Because the Green Deal and the Green New Deal in the United States are presented as new growth strategies. So we're going to have more of the same. It's just going to be electric. And there's this amazing quote inside the article that it says, there's an infinity of worlds in which the Green New Deal fails. A million President Sanderses, or with more urgency, Ocasio-Cortez's presiding over the disaster. And what is this disaster we're talking about? You can see the picture here. This is a mine, a rare earth mineral mine from central Mongolia. This is where our minerals for our EVs and batteries are coming from, creating new sacrifice zones, maybe this time not in the Amazon rainforest, but all over the world, in Chile, in Bolivia, in Mongolia. So we really need to reflect about the social and political and economic conditions that go into creating this new system. And why are we talking about post-growth? Because green growth has consistently proven to not work anymore. Happiness and human well-being have been decoupled from GDP increase since approximately the 1970s. GDP is not an appropriate indicator of human well-being. We are observing an ongoing ecological breakdown and climate crisis, and green growth is not working. Absolute long-term decoupling has never been proven, although it is by tweaking the facts and the figures, the European Union still presents its green strategies as based on a historical decoupling of resource use and greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, efficiency backfires. So the more solar panels we install, the cheaper the energy becomes, the more energy we use. So we actually end up having the same impact on the planet. So we need to find these new models that lead to an equitable downscaling of resource throughput and promote human well-being at the same time. What could this look like? Very quickly, in a kind of more operational kind of sense, something that combines the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals together with the planetary boundaries framework. So the set of variables determined by the Stockholm Resilience Center as the ones that actually keep together the biosphere and the planetary system in a balance that is conducive to human civilization. What does this mean? A donut economic model is not exactly what you're thinking. It's more like this discussion that is now being operationalized in cities like Berlin, Copenhagen, Amsterdam, and abroad, where we basically ensure that our policies are pushing the world into the safe and just space for humanity. This means that our economies are neither transgressing the upper ceiling of the donut, so they're not violating the planetary boundaries, but at the same time, they respect the lower ceiling of the donut, so ensuring that all people have access to food, water, just and fair income, and so on. So what could this look like in terms of the energy sector specifically, and where could energy communities come into this? A post-growth energy system would largely be based on democratically owned community energy initiatives, such as those envisioned by the the law in Greece in 2018. There would be fair and just energy caps operationalized across local, regional, and national levels. These energy communities would prioritize various social and ecological goals, not private profit. Technologies would be sourced and used sustainably and in a way that enhances human-nature relations. Information, resources, and technologies were open. Current regime where companies are racing to the bottom and to increase their profit, they're patenting everything and thus hindering innovation and knowledge sharing. And of course, there would be a sense of diversity, not hegemony, over goals and development pathways. Local communities would be given the space to decide how they themselves want to develop. So very quickly, this is the framework that I developed during my master's thesis at the Stockholm Resilience Center with the support of Electra Energy Cooperative, which is kind of maps out what could this post-growth transformation look like. These are the 5 key pillars. I will very briefly walk you through them. First of all, an energy community could engage in the creation of shared visions and meaning, in the sense that it would cultivate amongst its members a systemic and complex view of the world, helping them map the connections between nature, technology, and society. It would share its ideas of a post-growth energy system with a broader public and broader society. It would, as I said before, it would prioritize social and ecological goals over profit, and it would have an overarching post-growth vision. In terms of actor empowerment and innovative learning, it would deliberately teach its members various skills in order to increase their self-sufficiency. It would politically empower them to help them engage in the commons and other political processes. And it would keep experimenting with new ways of organization, financing, governing, and so on. In terms of the transformation of resource flows, energy communities could channel their surplus and savings into their various social and ecological purposes, not just to reap dividends for private shareholders, as we're seeing now. The financing would come from post-growth sources such as crowdfunding and crowdsourcing, instead of, let's say, systemic banks with high interest loans. Energy communities would be very deliberate about reducing their material and energy throughput. As we said before, we're over-consuming, we need to be very mindful of that. It would navigate the impacts of technological systems, so ensuring that, again, we're not creating new sacrifice zones with our lithium and other sorts of batteries, but we're trying to source this as equally and just as possible. And of course, it would also transform employment relations and ensuring that there is a healthy balance between personal life and work time. And this is the next point, which is one of the most important ones that Antonia stressed a lot in her talk, is the democratic control and governance. There would be plurality in decision-making and governance, meaning that everyone would get to have a seat in the table, regardless of their background. It would be a much more fair kind of system. And finally, there would be transformative coalition building, meaning that energy communities would network with other energy communities across Europe and the world, and they would build these networks of mutual support to build a relative self-sufficiency from, let's say, the capitalist economy.
Great.
Very quickly, I just have two more slides, and I'm going to close off.
Chris, I'm really sorry, but I've given everybody a little bit more time. So if you have one more sentence to say, I'm happy, but to give you 2 more slides cuts into the
okay.
The
then I'm just gonna say the final thing, which kind of the conclusion from my thesis as well was that in order to achieve this kind of post-growth transformative change, we do need to bond together and to create these networks of mutual support. This is what, in a sense, we are trying to do with the energy democracy dialogues, to bring stakeholders together and see how we can best help each other build up these small seeds, these small innovations. This is what Rescope is doing. This is what we're doing with our energy communities. So yeah, let's get down to business. Thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you, Chris. And sorry to cut you off. I just want to make sure there's time for the Q&A. So one of the things I would like to do first is give each of the panelists a chance to ask questions to one of the other panelists. If there's something that really resonated with you or you wanted to understand a little bit more about. Basim, maybe would you like to start? Is there something you'd like to ask either Antonia or Chris?
I mean, maybe to everyone, not to anyone in specific, is sort of how do you envision the concept of energy democracy functioning in you know, in reality, let's say in a 10 or 15 years from now? How would that, how would it change the way, you know, communities work or are organized, and how, you know, what would be the, let's say, most desired scenario in your mind from a visionary, from a vision perspective, but also realistic, so not you know, too hypothetical.
Antonio,
I can
first?
quickly intervene,
Sure.
just also based on what I was just talking about. I think for me it would be about creating this inspiring, coherent, and very politically minded vision that people can rally behind. And at least from my perspective, this would definitely challenge the growth-based economy. It would seek to create a new developmental model where, again, societal well-being, human well-being, and environmental sustainability are prioritized through a set of various indicators. I mentioned some of these, such as from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. That could be one semi-tangible vision.
Maybe then I can also add our perspective. I hope that it's not only my personal perspective. I'll do my best at least. I think that for us it's very important to actually, when we talk about the transition, as I was explaining, that when we are there, if we can ever be there, you know, that we have a sustainable energy system, but also a societal, let's say, transition as well. So the idea is that through this energy transition, we will get energy citizenship, but then this citizenship will be actually used, active citizenship will be used to indeed support each other and create, empower and strengthen the community side of community energy. Because I have the impression that when not, luckily I'm very happy, not today, but in other things, I think when we talk energy part, all the technical elements, but sometimes we forget the focus on the community part, so the social elements of this energy topic, for this topic.
Okay.
Can I just super quickly build on that one sentence?
Quickly.
Yes. About this supporting each other, because I mentioned it and Antonia just mentioned it. One of our flagship projects as Electra is Hyperion, a solar energy community of 30 members based in Athens. To build this up, we did a crowdfunding, and another big cooperative from Portugal actually largely contributed to that crowdfunding. And Rescope, as the European Federation of Energy Cooperatives, both us and the Portuguese cooperative we were members of, was very conducive to mediating this support. And this is a very practical and tangible example of how we can help each other and build this network of mutual support.
Great. I'm actually going to interrupt what I was doing with you asking each other questions, because there is a question from one of the listeners, and I'm sorry, your name is written in Greek, so I don't know what it is. But the question is
Yannis Zmirlis.
Thank you, Alice. That's wonderful. So the question here is relevant to what we were just talking about. And the question is, are for-profit cooperatives truly democratic, or does profit hinder the struggle to battle energy poverty? Does anybody want to respond to that?
I feel that maybe Christos would like to, or maybe I can imagine the answer of Christos, but I'm going to try here to give a first answer, let's say. So I'm going to talk actually in this particular case for myself, if I may. I actually think that there is nothing bad about actually having profit-oriented energy cooperative, as long as this profit is actually used in the context of the energy transition. That is my personal opinion. So for me, as I was explaining earlier in my statement, for me, we've seen in the past cooperatives that develop their business model in a sense that actually comes with a positive result at the end on the Excel sheets and the bank accounts. But the critical point here for energy communities and the democratic principle is that this profit is actually shared and distributed for the wider community, even I would say. So not only the members of these cooperatives, but the local community that is this cooperative is actually located within. So cooperatives are part of society, and we do our best to actually be supporting the overall sustainability transitions, let's say, with our work.
Chris or Basim, would you like to respond to that at all?
Well, I mean, I think I would agree with the interpretation. I think it's a question of what, I don't think profit per se is a problem. It's whether you create the right incentives in the system so that the profit is used towards a societal goal. And that's a $1 million question, because I think we're talking here about policies and systems that far extend energy policy and systems. I mean, energy poverty is not a solely, or not even probably the foremost problem of energy policy. Is a social policy issue. I mean, it has energy ramifications, it manifests in your lack to heat, but as we saw there, it's a societal problem, it's an economic problem, it's a poverty issue, right? And it has health ramification, economic cost, other costs. So I think in order to address these, the incentives have to be cross-sectorial, multi-stakeholder, and have to include language which is not purely energy people's language or energy policy language, because all the other policy peoples, or I mean, I'm using people in a very, sort of everyday fashion, they all speak different languages. Right, so I think to create the right incentives, it has to be cross-sectorial, and this is why I was coming from understanding, sort of the ecosystem. What drives whom, both on supply side and on demand side.
Okay, thank you for that. I hope that helps answer the question that was posed. One thing, I'm going to just put in a little plug here for the Community Energy for Energy Solidarity project, because it is specifically looking at how do we get energy communities to prioritize tackling energy poverty, whether it's with people in the cooperative or the community or the broader community, which both of you were talking a little bit about as well. And so a couple of the things that are relevant to that is, the first thing we're going to do is kind of survey existing energy communities to say, are you working on energy poverty? How are you doing that? Then we're going to assess the different mechanisms that groups are using and try to get groups that so far haven't tackled energy poverty to pick it up as one of the things they'll do over the next 3 years. And then we'll assess how effective those were and create a energy solidarity toolkit that has a very strong focus on energy cooperatives or energy communities tackling energy poverty. So do follow the Community Energy for Energy Solidarity program as it's just ramping up. Our website will come out in a couple of weeks, but I think that will, that's one that's definitely looking at this specific question. Antonia, do you have a question you'd like to ask to either Chris or Basim, or both of them?
Yes. So I can actually ask Chris, because I was actually quite inspired, let's say, by the clear argumentation regarding the new problems we're creating while trying to solve the problems that we're currently facing, the climate problem. So Chris, I mean, do you have in mind maybe if there was, let's say, one rule that you could imagine as being, the #1 rule that could save us from creating, let's say, even more problems than the one that we're addressing, what would that rule be? Through your research and the work that you have been doing, maybe you have this the answer to this question.
I think it would be what you and Basim have already discussed. It would be about reorienting how profit is used. And I'm not saying, and this is very important for our 42 panelists currently to clarify, that a post-growth world does not envision a world where we go back in caves and no one is doing business and no one is making profit. It's about how do you handle that profit. So, of course, every business should be financially sustainable. It should be able to pay its workers fair wages. It should be able to keep going. But we cannot sustain eternal growth and eternal profits being reinvested into shareholders and so on. So I think for me, that would be the number one rule. How do you channel, where do you channel that surplus? Where do you channel that profit? What are the various goals that you incorporate into your very statute? Like, what is the purpose, the very purpose of your business, which is the foundation of it? If your purpose is to tackle energy poverty, or it is to protect biodiversity, of course, you're not going to go and build a wind farm in the heart of a Natura 2000 protected area because your goal is to protect biodiversity. Then you're going to go build that wind farm next to, let's say, an already industrial area, and then you're going to channel that energy into tackling energy poverty for the local population. So it is what you, Besim, and Marilyn and Antonia have already said. It is about what are the priorities you set, and how then do you use your profit towards those priorities.
Right. I'm going to actually flip to another question from our listeners because it is relevant to this particular topic as well. So Jose Gabriel Luis Cordova has asked, taking into account the high level of energy poverty worldwide, a legal protection must take place within the legal order. In this context of constitutional recognition to the right to access energy should be done by states. Which are the better practices regarding energy access legal protection according to the experience of the panelists? Do any of you have anything to say about legal frameworks that you know have been set up and are effective? Oh, is that no?
I don't know, maybe Besim has to say,
well,
I was about to invite Stavroula, maybe after Besim.
Well, I mean, we were looking at energy investments in the multi-apartment building sector, right? There are about 42 laws in Slovakia that affect. So 42 pieces of legislation that have impact on the matter, right? And just untangling that, and a lot of it is in the housing sector. It's not in the energy sector, right? Some of it is in the construction aspect of housing, but a lot of it is in the use of housing sector. So, just tackling it through energy policy means, and this is just an illustration, you would be making a lot of assumptions, which are, I mean, energy policy usually gives incentives, but it doesn't regulate much stuff happening in the building, right? It gives certain obligations when you do new construction, but it doesn't really obligate much in regarding existing stock, right? So in order to understand what can work and how can it work within the current structure of tenants, and I'm talking here exclusively, obviously, not about neighborhoods or cooperatives, which are solidarity, but are made because people live in the same, vertical and will continue to do so. I think we need to unpack layers of incentives and legislations and regulatory frameworks which go much, much, much beyond the energy sector.
Great. I'm just going to also, I'll put into the chat, but this is one of the questions that comes up across a series of podcasts we've done on the right to energy. There's one that's talking about the right to energy from the international law perspective, one that's talking more about specific frameworks, and one that's talking about how do you build in energy sufficiency and the idea of sufficient energy for the capabilities approach, where it's less about how do we get people X number of kilowatt hours in relation to what they need is, but how do we make sure people have energy at enough and do the things that people can do in their daily lives. We have another question. Let me just, sorry, I'm just going to have to read it again.
Maybe
this is from
Marilyn. Yeah, Marilyn.
Yes.
I could also try to provide a response to Jose's question.
Perfect.
I'm not an energy poverty expert, though in terms of the legislation at the EU level, energy poverty is left to the member states. So it's mostly something that the national regulators are dealing with. And what I've seen is that the measures and the incentives that they're providing are more like sporadic and not that much of a comprehensive framework to deal with energy poverty. Though now on the Fit for 55 package and the new proposal of the Energy Efficiency Directive, there has been a proposal from the Commission to introduce a definition of what energy poverty is and actually provide some specific regulations on how to alleviate energy poverty. I think this is a good first step. Let's see how, if this is gonna become the reality of the EED. But in any case, I've sent in the chat a research article, which was recently published, and it deals with this topic and it maps the responses, the regulatory responses and the right to energy and the energy poverty topic in the context of the COVID, but it has a lot of examples, so this might help.
Great, thanks for that extra intervention. So we have another question from now Athena Kontalat, and again, I'm sure I've said your name poorly, but this question is for Antonia. Does community energy development in Europe reflect the corresponding needs in terms of energy poverty alleviation and energy democracy promotion on a spatial level or perhaps a geographical level? We have the sense so far that community energy is less developed as a model in the countries where there is the greatest need to tackle energy poverty through such models. So how can this be promoted given the political factors that affect this at a very local level?
Thank you very much. That is quite a difficult question, I have to say. I will try, Athena, to address it from my perspective. So regarding the first part of the question, okay, does community energy development reflect the needs? I can actually say that when it comes to reflecting the needs for energy democracy, yes, I can proudly, let's say that yes, the projects that are developing in our movement, let's say community energy movement, do reflect this need. But when it comes to the poverty alleviation, as also Merlin was saying earlier, we are now trying to map, let's say, how many initiatives are actually actively engaged with the topic, and we will try, let's say, to push for some kind of advancement in that within this direction. And you mentioned also that, okay, especially in some areas, geographic areas, we've seen that, you know, there is an increased need for this. How could we tackle this? I mean, this is something that maybe, again, to link with the background, my personal background, let's say, on different business models. And that's why sometimes it is actually important to indeed allow for a cooperative to establish a model, a business model, I mean, that results in profit, so that it can then indeed orient this profit to energy vulnerable communities. So this is like one I've seen personally some of these cases, business models, I mean, especially in the Netherlands. There are some initiatives that have been doing quite important work. And I think that now there is, this is the moment to try to use our creative, let's say, minds to develop these similar projects in a different context, because it might not be that easy, I have to say, to develop this kind of models in other locations. If I talk, I mean, I'm originally from Greece, so if I talk about the Greek case, it would be maybe a bit more difficult, say, to bring this profit, especially because we would rather try to make indeed the participation as easy as possible in terms of membership, in terms of energy prices. So that's why I'm saying that we should be also cautious. As Stavroula also mentioned, the topic is a topic that needs to be tackled by the national governments. Cooperatives can support, but I would say I prefer to be more like pessimistic or realistic. I don't know, better safe than sorry. I would say that we should not promise more than we can achieve. I think that there is possibilities. We could hopefully play a role, but it might be more difficult. I think that that's why cooperatives should actually also, focus on different kind of things. So when it comes to energy poverty, for instance, it's not only the side of consumption, it's not only the issue of the electricity price that you will be able to provide, but there is also a lot of things that you can do when it comes to insulation. And then we go back to the building stock and the discussion there. So also there, again, communities in terms of activities that they develop, we've seen a lot of model like citizen-led renovation projects. And this is something that I think that I'm more hopeful, let's say, more optimistic, that this area might bring faster, let's say, results from a community energy perspective. I hope I helped a little bit address partly the question.
Chris or Basim, do either of you want to quickly respond to that as well?
I would definitely want to comment on the difference of context and the necessity to, when you talk about a model, it doesn't mean much if you don't put it in context where you want to implement it. And context differ, within a same region, let alone within different countries. So I think when you talk about experiences and best practices, that's exactly what they are. They're best practices that you can take some inspiration from, but implementing them somewhere else without really understanding how it can be done and what are the circumstances and incentive factors, because usually it's all about incentives. It's a different thing. So that's why I tend to not to use, when I talk about a model, I don't say the name of the country where the model comes from, because it's discouraging people in Bulgaria or in I don't know, in Bosnia or in whatever, to use Swedish or Danish examples of housing projects which deal with energy poverty, because they are so different contexts. So I do agree with Antonia that getting to the basics, I think working with existing structures and focusing on improving the stock, because it's basically improving stock means improve comfort and more adequate housing conditions is, probably more realistic in many of the contexts where I work there, rather than talking about the prosumer side. I mean, prosumer concept is usually, in our experience, middle class and higher middle class and up activity, and we are trying to reach usually lower segments of the population with what we're trying to do, based on our mission and who we are as an organization.
Okay, we're coming down to our last 10 minutes. Chris, is there anything specific you want to add to that, or can I go on to a new question?
Go on. I think Antonia and Basim covered.
Okay, great. So one of the questions that came up earlier in the emails is there an interrelation between energy democracy and gender equality? And how can this be addressed, or how has it been addressed? Who has some inputs on that?
If I may, although I would be very happy to actually have one of the two men in the panel to say something, but I will give the floor to them after my first immediate reaction. Yes, so this is actually a very good question, a very interesting question. I think that, first of all, the first thing that I think that I need to say is that in this transition to energy democracy, we cannot afford talking about priority of issues. I think that we should be working on tackling both the climate as well as the societal challenges we face nowadays at the same time. So when we talk about energy poverty, for instance, it is unfortunately the case that women are actually hit more significantly than men, especially like single mothers, older women. This is something that unfortunately there are records about. So I think that indeed we should be able to, have, let's say, a gender perspective when we talk about the energy transition. There's a lot of benefits that gender just energy transition actually brings. Maybe the very first thing to say is that, of course, we need to activate and engage the other half of the population if we talk in binary terms. But I would also say that what is important is actually to also consider what are the specific needs and aspirations of people. So again, when we talk about energy democracy, we're talking about bringing everyone on board, sharing the benefits, distributing the costs equally, but it also has to do with the vision. What is our vision for the future? And I think that this is something that we should intensify our work actually. Again, it has to do with what I was saying earlier. Maybe I'm repeating myself, that when we talk about energy community, we need to also focus on the community side. So not only talking about the kilowatt hours or even the comforts, but to talk about, the community. So how an interesting thing is that earlier today I was following a presentation about the hidden benefits of energy communities, and one of these hidden benefits is the fact that people are actually engaged in community energy projects, are more prone to take initiative in other community projects as well, and in this way they actually improve, let's say, the overall conditions. And maybe I can use this opportunity to mention that as RescuePU, we actually have recently started also a working group focusing on the issue of gender power working group, because we also try to map what is already happening, similarly with what Merlin was saying about the poverty side of things, and also push and support, enable the communities to take action on this side as well. So feel free to contact me and Stavroula to join RescuePU. We would be happy to get you with us, and please send me also a message if you want to join this particular working group. I would be very happy to talk to you.
Chris, Basim?
Well, I mean, talking about decision-making, the decision-making unit is household. And, obviously I will speak in binary terms just for the sake of the argument here, like Antonia did. I think unpacking household decisions into their effects and understanding, who makes the decision is, when you do a social-cultural analysis of the decision-making, there is a significant factor, and I think something we need to do, because there are assumptions that within the household everybody understands the consumption, or experiences in the same way, which is not always the case. I think, especially in some of the context where we make a lot of the decision maker are male, outsized, to the number or to their representation in the community. And I think this is this gets translated into a decision which fits their needs. So I think that we need to have a radar for that, because that significant attention needs to be given to the fact that there are variety of use and effect of habitating in a building or in a community between household members within the same household. And I think we have a little bit of a blind spot on that as as practitioners on these subjects.
Chris, would you like to add any thoughts?
Yeah, just very quickly want to say that what Adonia said about this, the different needs. On my free time, sometimes I volunteer with this LGBT refugee solidarity group in Athens. And one of our most tough cases is this trans woman from a global south country who used to live, now she's in a better situation, in a house in the western suburbs of Attica that didn't even have power, didn't even have electricity. So there's multiple layers and identities that we all carry, and they all have a different significance in terms of their political weight. And we need to be cognizant of those, and we need to be able to map the needs that those carry. And not just the needs, it's not just about saying that, just because someone is a woman or just because someone is a refugee, they're necessarily oppressed, but also the opportunities and the powers and the perspectives and the knowledges that they bring to the table.
Great. Okay, thank you. I'm just going to close with a couple of thoughts, because we are running out of time, unfortunately. So I'm just going to put into the chat one of the organizations that I think is doing the most interesting work on energy democracy, and it's the Alliance Against Energy Poverty in Catalonia, in Barcelona. And one of the things that they have done a lot of work on is the gender aspect of it, but they've also done research on the effects on children and teens of energy poverty. But very much their model is to say, okay, it's going to be people in energy poverty who become the leaders of this movement. And one of the things they were able to do last fall was get a huge number, I'm going to forget what the amount was, but a huge number of energy debts were just paid out because of the initiatives that they've done. And one of the things that they recognize is that in most families, it's not necessarily the women who make decisions, but it's the women who manage energy in the households. It's the women who manage the temperature control during the day while the kids are out at school or at night or whatever. So I think that that's an important part of the gender aspect. Two other little things I wanted to bring up is in the community energy for energy solidarity project. One of the things that we've taken up is ResCoop Plus's definition of energy solidarity, which I think responds to the question that came up earlier about the profit aspect. So it's helpful, I think, to think about energy solidarity and energy democracy together. So the energy solidarity refers to measures and mechanisms established by energy communities and their members to help members in disadvantaged situations and promote efficiency in the system overall. So one of the things I think that's important here is to recognize if you have some homes in your energy community that are over-consuming because they're poor quality homes, taking the initiative to improve the efficiency of those homes improves the efficiency of your energy system overall. And the second thing I want to just quickly say is the importance of having dialogue across a whole bunch of different levels. I've just in the last 5 minutes received a message from a friend of mine, a personal friend of mine, who was the energy regulator in France a few years ago. And he was asked to give a presentation to the Senate this morning about this, these skyrocketing energy prices. And when he told me he was going to do this, I said, don't forget to say that they have to prioritize the worst performing homes of low-income people. And so that message went to the Senate this morning, which, those kinds of casual dialogues can take information up the chain, and hopefully that will lead to some better decisions in the French energy system. So Alice, I think I'm going to hand it back to you to wrap up.
Exactly. So thank you for the fruitful conversation and all the views that you have shared during this almost 1 hour discussion. I have managed here to keep some notes, let's say something like a very short wrap up, but the full wrap up of day one will be done tomorrow before the official opening of the discussion for the Balkan countries. So I'll start by the end, addressing a little bit the gender equality in the energy democracy framework. And what was said is that when we're talking about energy democracy, this is mainly about bringing everyone on board, which means that no discrimination should happen, despite probably the fact that women are more vulnerable to energy poverty and to all this energy transition area. In any case, no discrimination should happen and everybody needs to be on board. On the other hand, it was highlighted that with all new technologies, the new green technologies that they are available, and they will be available in the near future because the research is going on and there are a lot of funds, this is my view, there are a lot of funds from European Commission in highlighting all these technologies and to support the development of them. The energy transition will be much more easier, while at the same time translating energy to a simple language will make things easier for everyone to understand what energy is, how the energy use should be, how easy probably it is to be part of the energy production so as to have more active citizens and give actually the power to the hands of the citizens. In addition, when we're talking about energy transition, something that can lead us to a more energy democratic world, we should not try only to speak about energy transition as a process, but we also need to investigate and communicate and disseminate the whole process and to discuss more about the community-based economies, so as everyone be part of this new vision, let's say. And what else? Also considering that what Basim said, that energy policy, it gives more or less incentives, it's not a regulator. So this could be a very supporting tool or give the advantage to the ones that they are leading the energy transition to gather and influence more people so as to have a more energy democratic way of moving to the energy transition. These are the main, let's say, bullet points that I have gathered from this discussion. As I said, more will be presented tomorrow by Stavroula Papai and Antonia Proka, who will start the session. So thank you to everyone. Thank you, Merlin, for moderating the session. Thank you, Antonia. Thank you, Basim. Thank you, Chris. Thank you also, Stavroula, for your intervention to this discussion. And also I want to thank again Dimitris and Kyriaki, Dimitris Kitsikopoulos from Electra Energy and Kyriaki Metaxa for co-organizing this event and making it real. And also, last but not least, to thank Panayota Psalta from INZEB for supporting the whole technical, let's say, process and the communication with speakers, panelists, and for taking care of all the technical aspects and organizational aspects of this event. So see you tomorrow. We will start again at 3 CET. The registration link is available at the website of the event. Probably it will be good to share it again, Panayota, if it's easy for you to share the link. Tomorrow, as already said, we will discuss the energy democracy in the Balkans, and we are very looking forward to see what our speakers will share with us. So thank you and see you tomorrow. Bye.